Hi, friend. Niclas here. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to another episode of the Your Audio Solutions podcast, where it's my mission to find the tools and methods from the people that inspire you so you can apply their knowledge to your own life and work. And on the show today, we have not one, but two music composers, Christian Henson and Paul Thomson. You might have heard about them. They're the founders of Spitfire Audio, the highly renowned orchestral sample library, which you probably hear in all the films you're watching these days. But they have samples from like Hans Zimmer, the London Contemporary Orchestra, and many, many others. And it was a huge pleasure talking to both of them. Really, really great people, and I'm sure you're going to love this interview as well. But before we get into the interview with Paul and Christian, I'd love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening and watching this show. Your support really matters, and we're growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you. So really appreciate your support. And also feel free to check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. It's free, of course. And if you join, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public and some other cool stuff I'd like to do in the future. Maybe some Reddit AMA thing, we can get together on Zoom or private YouTube stream where we can hang out, ask questions, and all that sort of cool stuff. So feel free to join that link in the description below. But that's it. Let's get into the conversation with Christian and Paul. And I hope you can enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So please enjoy. But I just catch up with Paul a bit. But yeah, nice to meet you, Christian.
And you.
Where are you based? Are you in Scotland now? Is that
Yeah, I'm in Leith, which is we used to be a separate city to Edinburgh, but it's now part of Edinburgh. We've got a new office with a new team that we're building up here, which is kind of exciting. It's going to prove to be possibly a template for how we're rolling out offices all around the world.
Nice.
Which is great because there is something to be said for being geographical. I'm meeting just some extraordinary musicians and stuff, and that's informing some of our output. So it's not just the opportunity of meeting people who consume what we do. It's about meeting contributors potentially as well, globally.
Nice.
It's very exciting.
So that's for Spitfire Audio, I assume? Or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. I mean, so how close is that to Edinburgh? Because I've been to Edinburgh twice.
Well, it's kind of, I don't know if you've ever been to Brighton. There's a place called Hove, which is, it's pretty much the same city, but it's basically two cities have grown into each other. And it's exactly the same with Edinburgh. It's basically where the docks are is Leith.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure what the docks are, but
sure. It's the north of the city. Yeah.
No, but Edinburgh is cool. I've been to the what's it called?
Festival.
The festival.
Yeah.
It's bonkers. I forgot the name of it for some reason.
The Edinburgh Festival.
Yeah. Oh, that's it?
The Fringe Festival.
The Fringe. Yeah. That's the word.
Yeah. No, it's the biggest of its kind by a long shot in the world. It's absolutely insane. Something like 60,000 performers, 2 million people, 2 million bums on seats. It's just insane, absolutely insane. No, 20 million tickets sold, 2 million people visit in a month. And it's a small place, so you feel it.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to announce that actually it's on this year to some extent, so that's really exciting.
When does it start?
It's the whole month of August. Yeah, 800 venues.
Wow.
Yeah, insane.
That is insane. Let me see if I can see you guys a bit better. I don't know why I'm only seeing one. Well, this is better. Okay. I mean, considering how many shows there are, I wonder how many shows actually make a profit. Isn't that just one or two?
I think it's a bit of a calling card for a lot of people. I mean, there are major comedians who debuted at Edinburgh. I think two people I work with, Stephen Rees, for a series called Inside Number 9. They originally broke with what was it called, Paul? The League of Gentlemen.
League of Gentlemen, yeah.
which was an Edinburgh act they set up specifically for the Edinburgh Festival. You look at Eddie Izzard, he debuted here. Lee Evans debuted here. Yeah. So it's a big kind of launching point, but I think people make it work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's a way to get your show out there.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of investment in that aspect.
Absolutely.
Have you guys been a part of it, like on music side? No.
No, it is predominantly kind of comedy and theatrics. I think what's been really exciting as a parent is that they've figured out that no one goes to watch shows until about 3:00 in the afternoon. So up until that time, these very hungover comedians double up as children's entertainers, and you get these quite risque shows. My favorite was the incredible Mr. Bubbleman, who loves bubbles, hates children, and doesn't like his bubbles to be popped. And if you're a parent, you know what happens with children and bubbles. So he was really hungover, and it was like you could see the parents looking at each other going, "This is gold," because he's just going, "Okay, funny, just this time, don't pop it, because I'm trying to put you inside a bubble."
That's funny, man.
Yeah.
Have you guys followed the? I don't know if you guys are into football or not, but have you guys seen what happened? Was it yesterday? Sunday?
Yeah, crazy.
It's capitalism gone mad, and it is, without blowing our trumpets too much. When Paul and I set up Spitfire Audio, we just didn't. I believe capitalism is a great thing, but not bad capitalism, and that is bad capitalism. I think that for me, what it smacks of is, dare I say it, a lot of owners of these clubs aren't part of the culture. So there's a couple of American owners of clubs in Britain, and they do not understand how these football teams run to the heart of the community. You couldn't imagine Rangers opting out of being part of the Old Firm games that happen in Glasgow. It's part of the culture of that city, and I just think it's absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard it, I didn't understand why people started talking about banning the teams so quickly, and then FIFA would say, "Oh, we're going to ban players, whatnot." UEFA saying the same thing, I guess. But then when you think about it, I mean, isn't FIFA? I mean, the World Cup is going to be held in Qatar, whatever. I mean, the level of corruption, I don't know if is better.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I think you have to be careful about whataboutism. Just because they've done a bad thing doesn't mean you're allowed to do a bad thing,
sure,
which is totally unconnected. But I'm with you on that. But I believe UEFA and certainly the British Football League understand the cultural importance of this pyramid system, and how that these clubs are part of the community. They're not servicing the community; they're part of the community, and I think it's just disgraceful. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's because of so many of the teams are not owned locally anymore, or even remotely locally. They're owned by people who live thousands of miles away and don't really get it, and just kind of go, oh yeah, we'll make a load more money if we did that. It is really strange. I've really enjoyed seeing a lot of the pundits, Gary Lineker and who else have I seen?
Neville,
yeah. There's been quite a few of them coming out going, this is appalling. This is not what football's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a meritocracy, not a closed shop where only a few teams get to. I think it's incredible. I can't understand that it's got this far along before they've kind of realised that
well, it works for America though, Paul, doesn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah. I guess it's.
I mean, not necessarily in a good way. I mean, it's highly commercialized, but I guess if you've got these American owners, they're just going, well, works out here, fine.
Yeah.
But the thing is also, isn't it also because a lot of these European clubs are in super huge debts, whereas in America you can predict your income a bit more because you're not going to get relegated, which also takes away from the competition side, obviously. But
well, it's one city, one team. In London, got how many major football teams are there? There's like a dozen.
Yeah.
If you count the first and second league, and because it's part of communities, and communities, London isn't a singular community. It's all lots of little villages that have grown together. But the American model is to make these kind of monoliths, these one single city teams, and just funnel all the cash into those. One winner takes all. Terrible.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, in the midst of it, Mourinho got fired. I know this is not a football podcast, but because there's so much football going on. I don't know if you guys are into football. Are you into football?
We're sort of Arsenal supporters, aren't we? You're much longer standing than me, Christian.
I was a season ticket holder when I lived in London at Arsenal, and I've been supporting them since they're at Highbury, which is that was a very special place. I'm really glad I went there.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, how is it being an Arsenal supporter? Because I know they haven't done well in a long time.
I've always been pragmatic about that. Wenger's untouchables, or invincibles as they were called, was always Graham's defence. It was always Graham's defence. And what happened was the real bruiser players, which were part of Graham's team, they all retired. And we just he failed to grasp the British way of playing, which is, yes, you are only playing Brighton, but they're going to not let you play your fancy football. And I think that, I was always fairly pragmatic about it. But it was lovely it was just to be able to watch Thierry Henry play and stuff was just an absolute pleasure, you know.
Exactly. What do you think, Paul? Is that also your favourite time of Arsenal?
I inherited my love of Arsenal from my wife. So I was never a huge football fan growing up, but actually we always watch the games now. So, I don't have the kind of historical reference points apart from just as being the average, the average kind of medium interest viewer. But now obviously I'm, it's just shouting at the TV every 2 or 3 days. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, football is really fun. I love football, especially when, I don't want to go back to the Super League again, but what makes Champions League so special is that those games only happened once a season, essentially, like, I don't know, Liverpool against Real Madrid, for example, or whatever team you support, it's what makes those games special because they only happen every now and then. I think, I don't know if you want to see it every week. It would take away the specialness of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely.
But let's leave football, although it's fun to talk about. Actually, I saw a video on your YouTube channel, Christian, that I found really fascinating. It's something I'm really interested about too, and very intrigued by. And that's the whole thing. I guess it's about success ultimately. And it was a video about, if you have one piece of advice, what would that be? And your conclusion was to find your own voice. That was sort of the answer you had. But you also mentioned there's a lot of other pieces that have to be in place.
Yeah, I've actually honed it down to 3 now. If I was to give a single piece of advice that I think it's maybe the secret of Paul and my success, is to be yourself, to be brilliant, and to be generous, really. So I think that being yourself, I think a way of kind of rounding that down into a kind of an essence is to be truthful. And I think that is to remain connected to the things that have inspired you as a musician, and to use that influence that is true to you, to be, whether you want to say it's your own voice or whatever, but I think that's to be yourself. And because you have an inherent sense of right and wrong, good and bad. So if you're yourself, you're not trying to be anyone else, you have a grasp over what you're doing. One of the greatest problems that happens with us in media composition is that we often will have a director or a producer try and remove us from our music and make us do things that we don't agree with. And it was Dario Marinelli, the composer, who once said to me that if you lose connection with your music, you're out to sea. So be yourself as the first one. Be brilliant is also just to work hard and try to do it conscientiously. And I've yet to, and I'm sure you're the same, Paul, I've yet to meet a successful composer who hasn't had to work bloody hard. There simply isn't an exception to that rule. And I think that applies with everything. And then the other thing I think is really important is to be generous, and that is to be, at every stage of your journey, there will be help that you need and help that other people will need. And I think that being greedy and selfish inevitably ends in a stunted success, or certainly a success that you cannot enjoy and share. And I think that if we apply that to Spitfire Audio, we tend to, when people first meet us, it's us giving away stuff. And I say it's kind of like going to a farmer's market and going, I'll have one of those chocolate brownies, and them going, give me the money first before I give you the brownie. It's like, you just don't feel so good about the transaction if it's that way around. And I think that is for me would be my secret for entrepreneurs. And that's what I think the main problem, I will shut up in a second. The main problem with musicians is they don't see themselves as businesses. So they don't think of things in a business sense. But also it means we're always last in line with the begging bowl to get paid, because we get exploited, because we don't want to approach it like a business. So whether it be Spitfire or life as a composer, I would apply those three basic principles. What about you, Paul?
I kind of agree. I'm just thinking, taking that on from what you've just said, thinking about the way that, I don't know, editing or visual effects. Maybe visual effects is slightly different, but there is the other kind of, director of photography, or, someone like that. There are a lot of elements of the media production process where, everything is negotiated in advance. There's, they have to put a contract in place before the cameraman turns up, or the second assistant, the second AD or whatever. But with composers, for some reason, it's like, I've known a lot of situations through my career where, I've been expected to kind of take a clip of something and pitch ideas, without any. It's been very strange, actually, because when I first started writing music professionally, I worked for a little jingle and TV theme production company in Soho in London. And in those days, when you did a demo for an advert, something like that, for a commercial, there would be two companies pitching for it. The ad agency would pay each of the companies something 750 quid or £1,000, something like that. And then there might be two composers from each production company pitching. So they would write a demo or a couple of demos. So you'd have this little pool of ideas. The agency would then come to the studio to sit and watch everything and discuss with the composers, with the producers, and then they would pick whichever one they were most excited by, whoever's idea was kind of closest or came up with something really fresh. And then they would work with that person for the next 3 or 4 days until they had a master, and then off they'd go, and that was the job done. And I think around about the mid 2000s, I noticed that kind of old system was disappearing, and you were finding that ad agency producers were asking tens of composers and tens of these kind of tiny little music production companies that had no premises. So somebody sitting in their kitchen on a phone to get as many tracks as possible. And they'd end up with 200 or 300 demos. And inevitably, you're finding that the composers themselves are probably just recycling old material because nobody's getting paid. The agency producers end up with hundreds of demos. They can't possibly have any kind of idea when they listen through them all. It all becomes one giant unknown. And the whole system, is degraded. And like I say, I remember it quite clearly. I was being paid by an agency to do a demo for a Lexus commercial. And while I was actually writing my demo, I got called by 5 or 6 music production companies asking if I was up for doing a free demo for the job that I was being paid to demo. And I just went, this is not sustainable like this. This is going to, the ad agents, the ad industry like that is going to disintegrate soon. And sure enough, it's all over the place now.
But Paul, it's interesting because that brings me back to your original question, Niclas, which is, we created a situation like that voluntarily with this Westworld competition, where it was we were absolutely assaulted by, not in a good way, by a huge number of excellent quality material. It was really it was such a difficult judging process because of the sheer numbers. But I have to admit, the similarity was really alarming. And it was clear that people were using the same libraries, adopting the same techniques to second guess what they felt the client wanted or what was appropriate for that show without putting their own imprint on it. And that's why, is it David Goodell? His stood out all the way, because it was this kind of glowing jewel in this, well, I guess a glowing ruby in a sea of diamonds. It was amazing the lengths people had gone to, but it really takes me back to this thing of, when directors are listening to lots of different show reels, when people are considering you for work, if you're doing very able sounded orchestral music, it will all sound the same eventually to someone with untrained ears. So absolutely go with stuff that stimulates you, and that's something fundamental to creating your own voice. And what was it John Powell said, Paul?
Which one? Because the first quote that comes,
the thing you shouldn't listen to.
Oh, film music, yeah.
Whatever
he said, for God's sake, stop listening to bloody film music. It's just like, listen to the classical music that all of the film music has been ripped off from, and you'll have the pure source. But he grew up, I believe his dad was an orchestral player, so he grew up sitting, behind the orchestra at the back during rehearsals and absorbing all of this stuff. And unless there's a specific reference of something that I'm listening to, I tend not to. The things that I listen to feed my creative brain tend to be music that I grew up loving because I sang it because I was a cathedral chorister. So there's a whole period of, Vaughan Williams, Finzi, Herbert Howells. There's a whole kind of set of and everything, Longley, Messiaen, not just the English stuff, but there's a whole area of music like that just that I love because of its kind of complexity and the way that it breaks the rules. But also I'll listen to, I'll stick some symphony on or something that Christian's recommended that I've never heard before. And so I think that's the other element of it, which you've said before, Christian, is that the stuff that what you can come up with is quite powerfully affected by the stuff that you feed yourself. So you don't want to limit the complexity of the stuff that you're listening to, because it limits, I think. I mean, who knows?
I know it does. You're right, Paul. I totally agree. Do you know what I think it's like, guys? I think it's like, have you ever heard of terroir?
No.
Terroir is the art of making wine, and it's a very ancient tradition. And proper terroir takes into account everything, the entire environment. So they will, honestly, it goes a bit wacky sometimes, but they will put some herbs into a bull's horn and bury it in the ground at full moon. And these wines blind taste better than wines that haven't been made according to these ancient laws of terroir and superstition and stuff. And I just do think it is about the nutrients that you put in your soil from which to grow your pieces. And I think if you're just basically chucking discarded McDonald's burgers into your compost, you're not going to develop your worms and your cultures to create something that's special. I remember once having an assistant and walking into his room and heard this godforsaken groove that I couldn't. I'm a bit of a funketeer, so I'm a bit of a funk snob. And I said,
Yeah.
I said, what are you aiming for here? And he goes, I'm trying to sound like Jamiroquai. I'm like, for God's sake, go back to the source. Jamiroquai is just terrible rip-off merchants. And it's like,
Right.
go back to the Mazel brothers, go back to Kool and the Gang, go back to Tower of Power. And then what you'll produce will be of a higher quality, I believe. I totally agree with you, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a quick side note there. I mean, Christian, you said you were a funketeer or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And how was it then working with Chad Smith? Because that's what you did, right?
Oh, it was amazing.
And I have the T-shirt. I mean, the Red Hot Chili Peppers T-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we both Paul and I did a shift at Headley Grange, which is, for people who don't know, it's a house that was made famous with the recordings of Led Zeppelin, particularly a drum track when the levee breaks. And Led Zeppelin had caused so much havoc in this private residence that they stopped hiring it out to rock and rollers. So it was the first time music had been recorded in there since the late 70s. And it was a real pleasure. We set up a 24-track tape studio. And we came to the conclusion, Paul and I, that this was an opportunity that no drummer would turn down. No kind of real proper rock drummer. And it turns out Chad Smith and Roger Taylor, so Chad Smith from Red Hot Chili Peppers, Roger Taylor from Queen, were big fans of John Bonham and the sound that he got, particularly the sound he got there. So we flew Chad Smith from Red Hot Chili Peppers over. And yeah, I was very excited because I was a big fan of Red Hot Chili Peppers. And obviously Chad Smith, although he's a rock drummer, he's a funk drummer. So we just got to exchange notes on, everything from, and he'd worked with George Clinton, who is like he's one of my, biggest, I wouldn't say influences, because you won't hear much P-Funk in my orchestral work, but it's just something that I just found very, very inspiring. Paul, you worked with Roger Taylor, which must have been terrifying.
Cool.
It was, because it took me back to one of the, if not the first single I had as a very small child, was We Will Rock You. We Are the Champions. We Are the Champions. And I think it was a double A side. So I think it was We Are the Champions, and then We Will Rock You was on the B side, but kind of like a double A. But I remember the single cover with the kind of stone, what looked like a stone robot on the front. Anyway, then fast forward to the moment when I had to push the talk back for the first time to instruct Roger on what to do next, and I just thought, this is just ridiculous. I can't actually believe I'm sitting here asking Roger to play
what was the
this
first instructions you gave him?
Well, we did
less hi-hat.
Well, it's very funny. So he has, obviously he's got an incredibly distinctive style. And so he was coming up with, we wanted half of the library effectively is a playable kit with lots of different mics and all that kind of stuff. And then the other half is a selection of loops, which you can put together to, form song structures and all that kind of stuff. So that was the kind of fun bit, was kind of going, switching it up. So, okay, let's do medium tempo, ballad style. Okay, fast rock. Then let's try something a bit, just a little bit down from that. It was just incredible. It was just so much fun. It was like having instant Queen drum, like in AI or something. You just push a button and speak, and then immediately comes back the sound of Queen doing exactly what you just said. Very, very weird. But
That's
you
awesome.
had a really funny conversation with Roger, I think, didn't you, Christian, when you were telling him what the sessions were going to be?
No, I said we had someone who kind of set the meetings up for us. And I said to this guy before we had the meeting with Roger Taylor, it's like doing a sound check. And the guy went, I'm not sure that's the right thing to say to Roger Taylor, that basically you're coming here to do a sound check. So I was like, okay, I'll think of another way of saying it. So we got on the line and Roger said, hi guys, just tell me one thing. This is not going to be like a sound check, is it? I was really, really glad that I didn't get in there first. I have quite a nice circular story, Paul, that someone pointed out to me, and I hadn't thought of at the time. But the thing that inspired me to be a film composer was going to see the film Flash Gordon, terrible movie, but with a great score by Queen. And I remember being very aware that score was written by Queen, because the marketing of this film, it was a big hoo-ha. It was Queen's first film score. I remember coming out of the film, I was really paying attention to the score. I remember saying to my dad, who took me, I wish I could be in a band so I can do film score music as well. And my dad went, it's a job. You don't have to be in a band. It's an actual job. And I remember that it like this fluttering in my heart of, that's what I'm going to do, was that moment. And then someone pointed out to me, it must be strange that you've gone through this journey, become a film composer because of that inspiration. And now you're making tools for other film composers with the act that inspired you to start film composing in the first place. I'd never thought of it that way, but it's quite a nice romantic circular story.
Yeah. I mean, I love that, because when you get those opportunities, that's just awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy for both of you that you got that experience.
It's been interesting, Paul, isn't it? Because our life has. I mean, this is both Paul and I are composers, and it's, I think, probably one of the big USPs of Spitfire Audio is we don't need to do market research. You just play it, and if it's good for us, then we're the end user. And so there's lots of exciting, very romantic things about writing film music and TV music and touching lots of people with your music. But I would say, our experience making sounds and our experience with Spitfire Audio has at least equaled, if not exceeded, these amazing romantic highs that you get from our day job, so to speak, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is funny. I did, when I was working at that little music production company in Soho, my boss there was fixated with the Eurovision Song Contest. He was desperate to get something into the Eurovision Song Contest. So he would always find some way of putting a band together or getting an act, or, every year into the British bit of it, the selection process, which I think is called the Great British Song Contest, or I don't know what it's called now. It used to be called something like that. And we put together this dance act one year. This was in the late 90s. And we had, there were 4 singers, 4 female singers, and then me and one of the other guys that I worked with, like playing keyboards and, sort of looking idiotic in the background. And we recorded it for Top of the Pops. And the night that we recorded Top of the Pops, one of the other artists was BT doing his song Loving You More. And I watched him from, the backstage bit of the thing, and I was like, oh wow, that guy is so talented. And then weirdly, we now work with BT. So it has been an amazing thing where you kind of you get to meet and work with some of your musical heroes, people like Hans Zimmer, and it's really strange, but it is, there's you discover the excitement in also building stuff for somebody to use and being that involved in that part of the process. I mean, there's not many of us that are going to get to the to the level of where Hans is, and he's scoring films like Dunkirk and Interstellar and things like that. But actually, if you can bolt in to be part of the creative process of that, it's kind of just as exciting in a way,
Yeah, definitely.
So.
I mean, that's also what I feel about this podcast. Even though I'm not working with you guys on anything, or any of the other people I've had on the show, it's still very fulfilling just talking to you guys as an example, because I think that's also why I started in the music industry, was to work with your heroes, right? But just talk, or not just, but being able to talk to them fulfills that part of my dream that I had as well. So it's very so I definitely where you're coming from. It doesn't have to be maybe the exact dream you had, but it's still as fulfilling anyway, right?
Well, this is what goes back to being yourself. Is that that I was talking to someone about their career this morning actually, and they were comparing themselves to someone else, and I was saying, well, you could try and copy that person's journey, but people have understood that he did a little trick there, and that's actually quite valuable. And then he did that, and so everyone's at it now. And I always say it's like your career is like a whole warren of corridors with doors, and the doors that people before you have gone through have long since shut. And I think one of the really big mistakes that the music industry makes is it doesn't adapt to the time. And I think that we're entering into, I think, a great YouTube to watch is Jack Conte's latest video about having raised a ton of money for Patreon. Jack Conte is the founding CEO of Patreon. Wow. And he talks about us entering the second renaissance. That basically the art of creation has been Legoized, creation and distribution. And basically it puts creatives in the driving seat. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to change the business models. And there are so many people who act on our behalf, the record companies, the publishers, the collection agencies, who are fighting for the old paradigm, and that we mustn't change these things. And, I'll hear things quite often like a musician go, I didn't get into music to sell T-shirts. And you go, well, hang on a minute. If we think back to a golden era, maybe you could look to Led Zeppelin in their heyday to theme it a bit Led Zeppelin-y today. What made them so rich and ridiculously successful? Was it having number one singles? Well, no, because they didn't release any singles. But what they did do is they took away the merchandising rights from the venues. The venues used to make make and sell the merchandise for the acts that were appearing, and they turned that on its head so that the band would make and sell the merchandise, and that was the big turning point. So there's two things there. There's if you're not selling and making merchandise and getting sponsorship, then other people are going to do it and steal it from you. But the other thing I think is really important is, and I've completely lost my train of thought, so I must be totally lying. It'll come. No, but I think it's just really important to adapt with the times, and it's something that's really the music industry is really bad at doing. And it's at the moment my big bugbear is that it sees YouTube as the biggest enemy, and as a consequence, YouTube creators fear using music, and I think that's a terrible paradigm to establish. No, don't play any music because we'll get demonetized. All of this kind of stuff. So they really need to sort that out and understand the potential.
But that's what's happening to Rick Beato a lot too. I know you were on his show. I mean, and that doesn't make any sense at all. He's introducing all these great artists to a young audience, like people in my age. But then the record labels comes and bans the videos. Like, I don't really understand.
Well, I think that, I fear for my children who, no, I don't fear for them. They've got an eclectic taste based on the stuff that they're exposed to. They're not going through my record collection, and they're not going to find many Beatles records in there anyway. I am a fan of the Beatles, but because the Beatles are so they keep it so close, they don't synchronize anything. Well, you're not getting Beatles tracks on Stranger Things. So my kids are singing tracks by The Who, which are being used on Stranger Things, but not by the Beatles. And it seems to be these actors, the AC/DCs, the Ozzy Osbournes, the Beatles of this world, who are really incredibly fearful of their material being utilized in these new modern ways.
Exactly. It's yeah, I don't really know what to say because I don't really understand their thinking process.
Well, people who are good at kind of making money tend to be conservatively minded. And the reason they're conservatively minded is that they want to keep hold of the money. They don't want to take risks. They're not creatives. So that's when we refer to kind of the industry as suits. So they really don't want their business models to change. And unfortunately, I think that basically means we're always going to leave ourselves open to exploitation. Spotify is a great example of that, because we didn't get on board early enough. We didn't embrace it. The music companies, even with the MP3, were going, no, I don't want to listen. No, we're not going to embrace this technology. Well, it basically means we have to go with our begging bowl once everything's been taken from us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a fascinating area because it affects so many, and also, yeah, it affects people coming into the industry, obviously, but it also I want to go back to the point you made earlier, Christian, which was being a giver, and especially new artists. I guess that applies to you. And anyone starting a business, even, it doesn't have to be music, it can be anything. I don't know if you guys have read The Go Giver, that book. It's a really great short book about being able to give, and the more you give, the more you receive.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that's what you two do for Spitfire Audio as well, right? And how that helped you in the beginning, is that correct? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to
Yeah.
hear more about how you guys have implemented that, because I think coming into any industry, business, music, you have to give, and that's why YouTube is such a great platform, because you can give a lot about information and whatnot. But yeah, I'd love to hear how you guys have implemented that for Spitfire and how that have helped you succeed, I guess. Maybe whoever want to take it and go with it, Paul, maybe.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. Basically, we decided
We started with the royalties, didn't it?
Yeah. So when we were originally we just were a kind of private sample club of, there were a small group of film composers, who were people either that we knew of or that Christian had worked for a couple of kind of big Hollywood A-listers. And so we made this stuff because we weren't, we thought the stuff that we had wasn't good enough. And if you can make your demos sound as close as possible to the real thing, then you're more likely to be able to get the director or the producers to give you the money to go and record it. That's a bit of a kind of a non. That's not an instinctive thing that you might think. You might think the closer you get to the real thing, the less likely you are to get any money to record it. But it's actually the other way around, because everybody wants the real thing. They want the recording. All composers want as many musicians as possible to play on their stuff because it sounds so much better. So that was the initial driver, and then we had a point at which we realized that we'd made something that our little group of composers weren't interested in by accident, which was a percussion library. And it turns out that the one thing that every film composer does is makes their own percussion library, and that's part of the key to their own kind of special thing. Harry Gregson Williams' stuff is very different from Hans's, is very different from John Powell's. He recorded his in a certain location, and so they were like, oh, we're kind of set for percussion. So we were like, oh my god, we've just gone in and to the studio for days and days and days and recorded this enormously complicated and detailed, amazing orchestral percussion library. And so we went back to the fabulous percussionist that we worked with, Joby Burgess, and said, how do you feel about this being a kind of commercial thing, that we sell it to people, and it's basically a license fee, and then we'll pay you a royalty based on the sale. And so that was the beginning of it. And so it's kind of making sure that you're not. It's because we know a lot of the musicians, because we'd worked with them before Spitfire, and we knew the studios and we loved the people in the studios. We were never kind of looking at it as a kind of seam to mine or something to exploit. We were kind of thinking, how can we do this in such a way that everybody gets a benefit from it, that it's something that's good for everybody. And so that was the kind of idea. And then along the way, you, Christian, came up with the concept for Labs, didn't you, in its original format?
Which was a charity initiative. So we have our little kind of gems in our private collection that I think, Paul, you and I just said, I wish other people could use these because they're excellent, but they're not done in the way that you do a commercial library. We knew that if you did it as a commercial library, tried to sell it, people would complain because it's like, well, where's this and where's that and why has this got a fingernail on it and all of that, So we said, well, why don't we just give them away, but in return for charitable donations, which was hugely successful. And then we relaunched it a couple of years ago and removed that component and simply made Spitfire donate. How many percent? It's 1%.
It's 1% of our turnover.
Yeah.
So it's which is the kind of that's the Patagonia kind of I think, I don't know whether it was them that came up with it first, but the idea of doing something good, doing good things with good people, and committing that it's, you know, it's not a percentage of your profit, it's actually 1% of your turnover. So it's the same, you know, it's a commitment that goes out every month, and so the charities, you know, that we've supported with that are charities that have, you know, a specific personal meaning to us, and that it's made a really big difference for them, because it's a really decent, significant amount of money that they know they're getting every month. But that's the interesting thing. The other thing that kind of, as we were making this transition, and we'd created the software, the kind of plugin that was able to, you know, you were just able to have labs. You didn't need another piece of software to load it into. We kind of thought we really need to do this so that anybody can use this, and it's not restricted to those people who have got enough money that they can afford to, you know, buy Contact or whatever. And that kind of followed through. That's, you know, was so well received that when we were developing the BBC library with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, we were always keen, and they were very keen as well, for us to have a free version of that, so that there was no barrier. It's a really important part of the BBC's public charter that they try to advance education.
Right.
And so the idea of that was that there was no barrier to entry for people being able to try writing orchestral music for the first time. And that's been incredibly successful as well.
Yeah.
What's the latest number? I've got a vague idea. I think it's more than 250,000 people.
And I mean we've done a few questionnaires with a lot of those people, and we estimate that of those 250,000 people, probably 200,000 of them have never made orchestral music before. So that's a big kind of pinch me achievement. I mean, I'd love to bring it back to labs, actually, and to go back to my idea of distilling the culture in which we work, Paul, into these three things. By being generous, just working backwards, by being generous and giving labs away, they're really popular. But it's not because they're just free that they're really popular. The team who make them use the absolute highest quality recording techniques, instruments, but also have a really creative mindset. So for me, it's popular because it is generous and it is free. It's popular because it's brilliant, but because it's free, we can be ourselves.
Right.
We're not really working to the customer's needs and requirements. So as a consequence, we're constantly surprising them. We're not trying to do that. We're just responding to what we're stimulated by being ourselves. So it's a very freeing experiment, labs, because it enables us just to kind of express ourselves and share it. And then occasionally, you know, we made this thing called Frozen Strings, and people loved it. We went, well, we should maybe make Tundra, which is a quiet library. And we wouldn't have had the kind of commercial bravery to undertake something like that if we hadn't already received the love. So you get the love first, and you kind of can see the opportunity from that.
That's awesome, because this sort of thinking can be applied to anything, you know?
Absolutely.
And also for people who do music, and the same thing, you know. So it's a really beautiful thing.
So often, I think that if you're thinking about how you're going to make the money first, you are immediately putting yourself at odds with the person who's going to give you that money, because it's like you're thinking about the markup. And I think that also, you know, I see people time and time again sink a lot of money into something they think is a great idea, and it's like, well, can't you do a pop-up of it first and to see if actually people do like donuts with black pudding in them?
Yeah.
I can safely say none of my friends have done that. So.
It's a really great way of validating what you had in mind, if it actually works, before putting a lot of money into it, you know, giving out.
Yeah,
sorry.
I agree, Niclas. But the key is we don't make them So as testers,
Right.
we're not thinking.
Right.
I genuinely mean it. We're not thinking about this may make a lab, so let's make a labs to test it out. We're just making stuff that we think will be fun, and often. My wife's a very talented musician, and I bought her an auto harp before Christmas. I went, quickly before I wrap it, I'm going to run into the studio and sample it for labs. Because it's just something that we want, and that's I think that's a much healthier way to go about things.
Definitely. I mean, because this reminds me also of, because the last few days I've been thinking, like what I want to ask you guys, and which is, having looked at both of your lives a bit, like the different roads you've taken, and I might be wrong here, but it feels to me like the experience that you both have had is doors have opened, doors have closed, but you still always kept going, and now you are where you are with Spitfire Audio, and you're composing music and all that sort of stuff. But how, I haven't really written this question down, so it might sound weird, but how maybe I never know this, but how, like, achieving success that you two have, how do you know where you should go and where your focus should be? Or you never know, it doesn't just happen, I guess.
Yes, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen, but you don't generally know. But I saw something. There are two really weird sources for this. One thing which I read somewhere, which is 99% of people fall away. So if you're the 1% of people who don't fall away, you're in with a much better chance of succeeding at whatever you're trying to do. And
what's
then
that mean, falling away?
Fall away, like give up. They're just like, too much effort, or too hard. And the other thing was, I remember seeing a TV program about a man called William Matthias, who was a composer who wrote organ music, which is why I was interested in, I was an organist as a teenager. And I saw this program about how, I think he was the professor of Bangor University in Wales, professor of music. And he was following him around, and he sat at his desk and they filmed him, writing. And he said, I have to sit here from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I put my stuff away, apart from when he's teaching, obviously. But he said, some days I will only get one bar in, and some days I might write a couple of pages. But he said, nevertheless, I have to sit here and carry on chipping away, trying to write. And that really stuck with me, because you can't wait for inspiration. You have to sit and chip away at things. And, sometimes you feel like you've got nothing done. But the fact that you're prepared to just keep going back to it and working. And I think that when you do that, opportunities appear. One of my big mottos is leap and the net will appear.
Don't I know it?
I've lived like that, haven't I, Christian?
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree, Paul. Yeah, it's a couple of thoughts that I have. I think that we tend to be obsessed with the musings of our inner 5-year-olds. I've wanted to be a composer since I was 5, and both Paul and I have lots of kids between us. And so I've had 3 5-year-olds, and I can safely say when they were all 5, they were definitely not in a position to make a career choice. So we tend to obsess about a fantasy we create when we're, toddlers. And I think being very open-minded is absolutely key. And it ties in with this kind of closed-minded idea of what the idea that you're going to play Wembley Stadium as a headline act. That's the rarity of that actually happening is it's obscenely small. So I think being open-minded to the opportunities that prevail is absolutely key, and you adapt with the opportunities that come. But I think the key thing is you don't learn from success; you learn from mistakes. And I mean, one of the big successes of my life is I'm in a successful partnership with Paul, and we get on. We don't row. We very rarely say a cross word to each other. Paul scolded me once for my terrible customer support, but that's probably about the end of it. And I think that the reason why Paul and I are in a successful business partnership is because we're in 2 bloody awful ones before.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely crucial. So I think being open-minded, and you never really get there. It's always about the journey. So I think that there's a very popular saying in kind of business speak, and that is to follow your bliss. If you don't enjoy the process, just stop doing that process and do something else. There are so many things that you can do that's connected with the music industry, with the film industry, whether it be making samples or recording dialogue. There's loads of different jobs out there. And as I say, we're entering into a golden age. So just be very open-minded about the opportunities. Paul and I, we had great aspirations as composers, but I think both you and I, Paul, understood that Spitfire was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and one that we'd really regret not taking by the horns.
Yeah, and we just discovered that we found something that we were really good at and we enjoyed doing, which is making sounds. And we both used to make sounds for, every job that we did.
Yeah.
So it's just an extension of that. It's just a slightly different path.
Yeah, I was saying today to someone, I've actually admitted that I prefer making sounds to making music. But if I don't make music, I have no need to make sounds. So they're fairly intertwined. It just I seem to have commercialized the sound making bit more than the music making bit, but I make both.
Yeah.
I mean, as you two were speaking, I was just trying to think about and internalize what you said. So if I understand it correct, I don't know who of you said, failure, you learn more from failure, obviously, than success. So would you say that you achieve success by, you don't really know what the success will be, but because of all these failures, you try another thing. It's still within the same umbrella of let's say making sounds, whatever that's music or whatever. But would you say success come from failing? Oh, I failed at this particular thing, but then you try another thing, and eventually you find the thing that works. Is that correct?
It's how you measure success. And success for me is like, we had a discussion about what is speed. Well, it has to be something over time. And I think success is something over time. So I would say something for me, I took a job on that was a pain in the backside because I didn't have much time to do it. And someone just told me we've been making these for 10 years now. That is a successful project. But you can only reflect on success. Right. You can't go. You're never there going, this is me being successful. You go. Well, that meal was a success. People enjoyed it. It wasn't just because I did it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how many times have you? Maybe that's the wrong question. Actually, not how many times, but you said success changes. I guess. How many times have you had to? I'm not saying it again, but how many times have you had to, or have you sat down to be like, you need to really define what success is, or it just comes naturally as you go along? Whoever wants to answer, maybe Paul.
That's a really hard question to answer. I think the most useful thing I can say in relation to that is kind of referring back to the chipping away thing. So it's a very easy, very early in my kind of professional composing career, somebody that I was working with said, make the most of what you've got. And because I was getting to the point where I was just going to give up on a track that I was doing. And he helped me. He just did some production on it and suddenly it sounded incredible. And so I realized you've got to give what you're doing the opportunity to be complete. You've got to get to the end. You can't, it's very easy to judge it halfway through and go, this is terrible. It's only when you get to the end that you can work out whether you've actually done something successfully or not on the journey itself.
But how do you know? I guess you don't really know, but how do you know if the thing you're chipping away on is actually worth it? Because I'm always thinking
you don't.
Right,
that's the problem.
Right.
That's the eternal dilemma.
But that's why being in connecting with yourself and doing something that you think is good is a good starting point.
Yeah.
Doing something which is a nourishing experience is a great starting point. I mean, going back to that job I was talking about, it's some of the most genius people I've ever worked with, and they're so kind and so respectful. And it's really difficult for me to work with arseholes now because I know that you can achieve great things by not being one. But when you're working on it, you have no idea. I think a real key thing is that I think that what I see is a lot of people crossing their arms and waiting for opportunity to come their way. And in fact, a very common thing that I spot, and I'm definitely guilty of, but I spoke to someone this morning about, is composers love to get agents because it enables them to blame someone else for their failures.
Right.
And I think that getting an agent is just putting you into a new professional category. That's all that is. They're not going to find you the work. You've got to get out there and find it. And if the work isn't there, find people who need help. But just get out there, get experienced, and make mistakes. And I think if you're working, that is, I think, for me, getting up every day to fail in music is far better than getting up every day to succeed in banking. So I just humbly recommend that you just get on with it. And I think the fact of the matter is if you're not proud, you can find ways of earning money from it and earning a living from it. It might not be your idea, your 5-year-old's idea of what it's all about, but it's that in itself is a success. I'm very lucky to be married to a musician, and she can see what Paul and I have created, and she says, it's really difficult to make money in the music industry. So well done.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not doing what we set out to do. It's a massive tangent.
Yeah, but it's inspiring anyway. Because last year, like when the pandemic hit, or actually before that, I always I didn't not value myself, that's not the right word, but I always thought my success, what I felt was success, was how much work I had or how much money I made, so I could be significant to others, right? I could be like, oh, if this guy asked me, did you work this month, you can say blah 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 blah, and that made me feel successful. But the pandemic actually made me have to rethink what is successful to me, and that was the whole thing about feeling fulfilled. And I think that's also what you two are touching upon, like success to someone can be, how you feel fulfilled rather than just success. So maybe just a quick note on that.
If you're happy what you're doing, and what you're doing isn't hurting yourself or other people, then I think that for me is success.
Yeah. I mean, let's wrap it up there because I know you guys are busy. But it was a real pleasure. And thank you for taking your time. I really enjoyed it.
It's been a real pleasure, Niclas. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Christian. It was a huge pleasure talking to the both of you. And I hope you, the watcher or listener, enjoyed it as well. Check out Spitfire Audio. Check out their work. Really great guys. And it was a real pleasure talking to them. And also feel free to hit subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you are listening to this show. Your support really matters. And as I said before, we're growing slowly but steadily. And that's all thanks to you. So I really appreciate your support. Also, again, feel free to check out the Other Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just enter your name and email address and you have joined the Other Tribe email list. It's free, of course, and if you join, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public and a chance, a chance to maybe we can do some AMA sort of thing, get together on Zoom and have like just ask me anything Reddit thing. That would be cool to see if you guys would enjoy that. Join the Other Tribe email list, and I'll let you know more about that in the future. But that's it for this week. Real pleasure having you here as always. And I'll see you again next week. So take care.